Good morning. So, ladies, gentlemen, honorable member of the European Parliament, dear speakers, dear colleagues of Panathlon International EU Brussels, welcome today here in Brussels for this debate that will focus on the rights of women in cycling. This is very exciting because we are in the context of the UCI's Road World Championship, and I think this debate is very timely. So first of all, a couple of words on our club. Panathlon International EU Brussels is part of the general international movement of Panathlon. It is a great family committed to promoting ethics in sports. Panathlon International has a very long story of proved records to stand up in the fight against any form of discrimination, being gender, race, religion, or disability-based. It also strongly opposes sports manipulation, doping, any form of abuses, slavery, both in the professional and in grassroots sports. And we want to foster a culture where sport is a positive value, a factor for social improvement, education, integration, and progress of society. So our specific mission in Brussels, our little club, aims at raising the attention of the EU institutions on the values of Panathlon, institutions which, by nature, do share our priorities as provided by the treaty. And we do not only aim at raising their attention on our projects, but we also aim at directly involving them in our activities to ensure a follow-up and make a difference, have an impact on real life. And we thank you, the institutions, both the European Parliament and the European Commission, to be again with us today to discuss this issue. I would like also to briefly pay tribute to the late Count Rogge, Belgian Olympic medalist and former IOC president, who was a champion of ethics in sport and supported our movement and fought against any form of discrimination, doping, sports manipulation. So now 2 words on today's event, ending the fairy tale, women's rights on 2 wheels. So we all know fairy tales often start with abuses on young women. And in many societies, we all know, women are often exploited, undereducated, underpaid, or not equally paid as men. And their role is not recognized, without mentioning crime, abuses, physical abuses. And in sports, this situation is quite common in many disciplines. And cycling, we thought, is a master case, where even in our societies, athletes are not acknowledged in the same manner as men are. So cycling is a sport of endurance and hard work, but also of public recognition, supporters, and grassroots sports. And the prize is also freedom and independence. Women have the endurance and do work hard, but often the price is meager. This is what we want to tackle today. Fairy tales generally end with a happy end, but in the cycling world, many times Cinderella remains Cinderella, Snow White does not wake up, and Rapunzel, the hero of our cartoon, continues to live in the tower and does not cut her long hair. We want and we must find a happy way forward for this fairy tale, to ensure that any woman in cycling, as well as in any other sport, is acknowledged, receives a fair retribution, and is a role model for girls, but also for boys, contributing to women empowerment and ultimately to a better society. So I look forward to the exchanges of today, and I will see you again later at the end so that we look at the outcomes of these exchanges and decide together on the way forward. Thank you, and back to you, Louise, for moderating.
Thank you very much, Antonella. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Louise Harvey, and I'm the non-executive chair of FTI Consulting, which is a business consultancy based here in Brussels, but in fact we're a global consultancy. It's my honor to be able to moderate the events today. I have to say, from a personal perspective, as somebody who has moderated and participated in many events on women's issues in many countries over many years, this is the first time I've ever moderated an event where all of the speakers have been women. So that really is a first for me. I'd like to now introduce the first round of speakers. One of our speakers is actually going to be speaking on camera to us from Strasbourg, but I will introduce the people that are here in the room today before we go to her. So on my right, I would like to welcome Iris Slappendell, who is the founder of the Cyclist Alliance in the Netherlands. She's a former national champion Netherlands for road cycling, a specialist in time trial, and the owner of cyclist clothing brand Iris, which has been used by the Dutch national team. On my left is Suzanne Ryder, who is a PhD candidate at Victoria University, specialising in sport, diversity and social change. And she's focusing on the lived experience in professional women's road cycling. And on Iris's right is Gwenda Stevens, the former international rowing athlete, president of the Belgian Rowing Federation, and a board member of the Belgian Olympic Committee. And I would just add, the only Flemish woman on the Belgian Olympic Committee. So welcome to those speakers. And now I would like to turn over to hear from the Belgian MEP, Asita Kanko, who, as I've already mentioned, is unable to be with us today, but has sent us a message from Strasbourg where she's attending the session there. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Asita Kanko and I'm a member of the European Parliament. Thank you very much for having me here today. For those who know me, know that I have always fiercely advocated for women's rights. I have been for as long as I can remember a feminist, and I will be for as long as I can fight. It's my duty to continue to fight for women's rights everywhere, here, but also in places like Afghanistan, where women are hit by gender apartheid of the Taliban. In Burkina Faso, where I was born, where 3 out of 4 girls undergo female genital mutilation. In Niger, where girls are denied education, but also here in Europe, where glass ceilings still exist all around us, where Islamism also does exist, where the gender pay gap still is too big, where in business and politics or sports, women are still left behind, and where female athletes are not given as much praise as their male colleagues. Our female talents are underrepresented in the media and are not treated with the same respect and attention. That's why I'm honored to participate in this webinar to advocate for women's rights on 2 wheels. The Flemish are a big fan of cycling, to watch but also to go on the road themselves. Whenever I watch a tour on television, I'm reminded of the Tour of Faso, a big happening in my country of birth, Burkina Faso. As a teenager, I was a big fan and I went on the streets to support. And now I've passed that on to my daughter, who is 14. It was not too long ago that we started to explore the roads ourselves in Flanders. And that gives such a good feeling. Together, Together we hit the road and would cycle for hours, enjoying the nature, people we meet, and speaking. I cherish these moments, seeing my daughter so happy on her wheels through her home place, Flanders. But when I realize how little attention is given to these female talents in cycling, I think she cannot have the opportunity to be inspired if she would like to go farther. The morning after the Tour de Flanders, the Ronde van Vlaanderen, with magnificent performances of Annemiek van Vleuten, Anna van Bregem, Lotte Kopecky, and Marianne Vos, I opened the newspaper and guess what I saw? Barely anything about these women, barely anything about their great achievements, barely anything about the Ronde van Vlaanderen for vrouwen. Because when there is a tour, it's automatically a tour for men. Only if it is specifically said, the tour for women. And yet, these were the women who convinced me to buy my first race bike and to hit the road. Hopefully, they will do so for many other women and girls. Gender equality is much needed everywhere, including in sport. Even cycling clothes are not always made for women. How can we expect women to feel comfortable when their clothes are not based on their bodies? Salaries are not equal. Media attention is not equal. But change is coming. Some cycling teams have made the minimum salaries equal for men and women. We are far from reaching the finish line. A lot still needs to be done. But with the amazing talents we have these days and the fact that we are talking about this today, I'm confident that one day we will see the newspapers full of female cyclists. I will contribute to make that happen. Thank you very much.
We all agree it's absolutely important that we have the support at political level, and Mrs. Kanko and others in the European Parliament, I think, have demonstrated their support in this area. I'd like to move on without any further ado to our next speakers. And Iris, if I may invite you to kick off, please.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here. I think it's really great, first of all, that we have such a day all together to talk about women's cycling and the opportunities of women's cycling. My only question is, how can I scroll myself through the presentation? Oh, they do that. Okay. Dat might be a bit of een... Nee, ik doe het liever zelf. Of die zo ver rijdt. Deze? Nee. Nee. En dan moet je even opletten. And following up on the introduction, yes, I was a specialist in time trials, but I was also a specialist in breakaways. And I think actually the Cyclist Alliance is an example of, it's maybe also kind of a breakaway. I've been a professional cyclist since 2016, and when I retired, together with two colleagues, we thought about starting a union really focused on women's cycling. And we did that because of our mutual experience or personal experience in the sport. The Cyclist Alliance is an independent women's cycling union where we're run by current and former pros, and we provide support to cyclists during and after their careers. And our aim is 100% of the riders to have a safe and stable working environment. Oh, next slide, please. We do that by the following topics: level the playing field, help the peloton making a living from the sport, help to create a safe environment, and helping to thrive the sport. And this is the board where we are currently working with. So next to me, there's the other founder still present in the board, Gracie Elvin. It's a board of 5 women, and next to that we have a group of 10 part-time and voluntary staff members, which 5 of them have a legal background, but there's also independent medical advisor, nutritionist, sport psychologist. So it's an organization that has grown quite a lot in the recent years. Coming back to the topic why we are here today, Dam emailed me a few months ago with the question if I wanted to speak here, and of course I immediately said yes, because it's a great opportunity, like I said, to talk about women cycling and the work of the Cyclist Alliance. But then he said my topic was physical integrity of women in cycling, and that was a little bit hard for me, especially as a non-English native speaker. So I did a little bit of research, like what's the right angle to start this presentation, where to talk about. And this is something I found: integrity, discrimination that is based upon gender and/or sexual identity. But it's also different in could be different in other meanings. So, for example, in sport, it's more like respect for oneself and others, moral responsibility, and accountability. And then I think, like, what does it mean in cycling today, and why are we actually here together? It really relates to the why, the question, why did we start the Cyclist Alliance back in 2017, and why are we still needed today? So I decided to keep this presentation really close to the work we currently do with the Cyclist Alliance, because it perfectly aligns, I think, with the subject that is given to me. So first of all, why does women cycling need a union? Well, 60% of the riders in the international peloton earn less than 15,000 euros a year. 34% receives no salary, so that's more than half of that 63%. 80% of the riders sign a contract without any legal advice, and 51% have to reimburse their team for expenses, which could be travel, equipment, healthcare, etc. This is data from our own surveys. The following slides is just facts that are the current regulations in women's cycling, and I've related it. I took the World Tour as the topic because there's a World Tour for men and for women, so it's quite easy to compare. For example, when you this is the minimum salaries in the World Tour. For women, it's less than half of the men's minimum salary. When we go to prize money minimums, that's an even more daunting figure. The difference for the winner of a World Tour race is well, I should say, if a man wins a World Tour race, he earns about up to 18,500 euro more than for the women's race, and the difference in the total prize money is a one-day race example is up to 43,000 euros. And I also need to say that, yes, the prize money difference is really big, but also the women do not have the opportunity to race a Grand Tour like the Tour de France, for example, while the men have 3. And that's also a big loss of economic opportunity, as, for example, in the Tour de France, the prize money could be up to €1 million. Races. Also the World Tour, the men have 11 more races than the Women's World Tour, and that equates to 112 more race days. Which is also something you can explain, because the Women's World Tour is much younger, it's a smaller peloton. But the naming of the league or the races, I think, really reinforces the male norm and makes the women's tour a secondary or even inferior event to the men's tour. For example, we talk about the World Tour and the Women's World Tour. We talk about the Tour de France versus the Tour de France Femmes. Now it's finally going to happen next year. And we also have an Amstel Gold Race Ladies Edition, while we don't have a Gentleman's Edition. And then if we look at TV coverage, which is a little bit more positive numbers, I am happy to say. There's more and more races that are live, able to be seen on TV. And also the viewing figures are quite good. For example, Liège-Bastogne-Liège had, in the Netherlands, almost the same number of viewers. But then, of course, or maybe not of course, but the men's race is shown for a few hours more than the women's race, which makes it that it has a greater reach. Gent-Wevelgem is also a great example. It had like the highest figure of viewers reported ever. So there is definitely progress in, I mean, there's still a significant difference, but there's definitely progress. And it's also shows that when the races are on TV, fans also watch it. And that's really important for the development of the sport, because fans learn about the riders and teams, and the race tactics are, as you might know, are really important in the storyline of the races. So it's great that we can watch it, and hopefully can watch more and longer races in the future. Back to the topic, physical integrity of women in cycling. Based on these facts that I've just shown you, we could even say that cycling as a sport has restricted women's physical integrity. The setup of women's cycling was designed to create lesser versions of men's. Less races, less distance, less money. And the rhetoric of the key stakeholders in the sport often overshadows the voices of the athletes, concealing the reality there is still so much to be done to achieve gender equality. But this is also a really positive get-together, I've heard, so what can we do about it? These are the facts, but there is still the future ahead of us, and I think we're here with a lot of like-minded people. So I would like to take the following slides to explain a little bit what we do as a Cyclist Alliance to change the current state of women's cycling. And again, these facts that are really important. We carry out a survey every year since 2017. And with the results of that survey, we are able to track the sport's progression or regression in some cases year on year. And that data has already proven to be super valuable. For example, it really helped to push for a minimum salary at the Women's World Tour. Also, the surveys highlight a few key inequalities that still need to be tackled, as you see. And I want to go a little bit deeper into a few of those. First of all, the economic situation. The wage disparity gap between World Tour and continental riders. So this is really focused on women's cycling right now. It's not a comparison with men. It's the women's peloton as it is right now. Continental teams and World Tour teams, that is, they form together the peloton that races together every week. 34% of those riders do not get any salary from their team. And this group of women is even growing. Back in 2017, it was 17%, and currently it's 34%. On the other hand, we see that the top salaries are rising, which of course is really positive, but it's very alarming that the gap between the two tiers is becoming bigger. And of course you could say, well, are these women that then have no or very little earnings from their sport, are they even to be considered professional? And I think they are, because they do spend the same time on training and racing as their peers that do get paid for it. And also their teams expect the same kind of commitment from the riders that still have a part-time job or combine their sport with studies. And also you see that then it is probably very logical that 85% of the riders say that financial reasons is is the main reason to leave the sport earlier than they would actually wish. Leadership, also a very important element to change sport. With the Cyclist Alliance, we're a woman-led organization. We're founded by riders. We have a full female board. We also have a rider council, which are 11 elected riders that have direct influence on our organization. And it's really great that they take the responsibility to work together very closely with us. We are part of the EU Athletes Leadership Program, which focuses on dual career, and we have our own mentorship program, where a young and inexperienced rider is matched with an experienced rider, and they help each other navigate through the professional peloton. We also have the support of 5 industry partners for this program, and through this support we are able to offer, for example, work placements and other projects for athletes if they wish to retire out of the sport, wish to transfer out of the sport. And if you look to other stakeholders in the sport, how they're, when it comes to females in leadership, women in leadership position, I think, the fact that already 5 big industry partners joined the TCA in this mentorship program shows that the industry, the cycling industry, really recognizes they're missing women in leadership position, or probably diversity in general. And next to, for example, some joining our mentorship program, you see a lot of initiatives in the industry. When it comes to federations, taking the UCI as an example, the management committee, which is the executive body at the UCI, there's 13 people in that commission, from which is one woman, Caterina Nash, from who we will hear later. Unfortunately, she is the only one who doesn't have a voting right in that commission. And that's actually not because she's a woman, but because the athletes don't have a vote, which is probably also a little bit alarming. And then Cpa Cycling, another important stakeholder in cycling, the recognized union by the UCI, they have no women at all in their steering committee, and yet they claim to represent the women. Education. We really believe that knowledge is power. So I think one of the strengths of the Cyclist Alliance is that we do a lot on education. Thanks to our staff, we are able to give a lot of legal support. We have a big platform on our website where riders can find all information, salary guidelines, a contract management platform. We have specific tax advice, visa support for riders that come from other parts of the world, which makes it sometimes really complicated to raise here. Resources on financial planning, etc. So there's a lot of ways to educate our riders, and in general they're also quite happy to attend webinars, and they know how to find our experts. Safety is another topic. Safe working conditions. When you think about safety, then probably in cycling you think about the course safety. We've seen a pretty horrible accident last year, which led to a UCI safety commission, where then was no woman part of that commission or invited. After a few months, they finally did put a female rider in that commission. But I think it's quite a good example of the priorities there. With the TCA, we have a dedicated ethics officer that we hired because we've been helping some riders on cases of harassment and abuse. And again, also there, we found that it was really hard to, for example, file complaints at the UCI or national federations. And this dedicated ethics officer guides riders that come forward with such a complaint through the process. With this experience, we also made a report of recommendations for the UCI, which they have now accepted for a big part, and has led to an improved UCI code of ethics. And of course, last year with COVID, we've been quite active in lobbying for safe working conditions. And we've also been really active in lobbying for a separate gender start at mountain bike marathon races successfully. Media coverage, my last topic, really important one, and this is also, maybe the most positive one. Because today 50% of the women worldwide, they are interested in participating in sports. This number has never been so high. 84% of the sports fans have an interest in women's sport, but only a much smaller percentage of media coverage is dedicated to women's sport. We see more and more interest of brands to invest in women's sport. Cycling boosts the largest participation rate in the world, and that's really a great thing about cycling. You can not just only watch it, but it's quite easy to participate in it as well. COVID created a huge boost in the level of participation of women in sport, and especially cycling. And then there's a growing interest in women's professional racing. And I think bottom line, you could say that if women see women, it drives greater participation, a little bit like we've just heard in the introduction. That role model concept is really important for getting more young girls into the sport, but also to fan consumption of the sport also fuels the financial relationships for all the stakeholders in the sport. And then, last but not least, I want to finish with a few closing statements. Which is not really a conclusion, but it's more, they are more statements that I would like you to think about, and maybe we can discuss it later. But I think, first of all, I would like to say it's really important that we get more women into decision-making positions, and I think you'll tell a little bit more about that later, how that could be achieved. Secondly, we need to create more effective ways for women who are discriminated against or who have their physical integrity compromised to address that. And we will not get physical integrity until women are respected as athletes. And to do that, you need dual investment in economics and media. And last but not least, in this presentation, I also did a lot of comparing with men's cycling, and I think that's kind of maybe the time we're living in also, that we keep comparing with men, but maybe we should also forget about the men a little bit as well, especially men's cycling, because there's also a lot of things that are not perfect in men's cycling. Maybe you could even say it's time for women to take control of their own sport and create a racing calendar which is designed by female athletes. Something to think about, and I hope to speak with you all about this later.
Thank you very much, Iris. I mean, an absolutely wonderful presentation, most interesting, some very shocking statistics in there, but I think your call to arms, if you like, resonates with us all. The one question that I would ask before I pass on to Suzanne is you're clearly doing great things with your alliance in the Netherlands. Are there similar organisations in other EU member states, and do you have contact with them, and are you sort of working together to move the interests of the sport together at sort of EU level?
No, well, we're actually an international organization, so our members are riders from all over the world, and we specifically didn't start a national organization because women's cycling is still a small sport, and we believe that if you make an international union with direct membership and direct voting rights, it is really the most easy way to organize and unite all the riders. So we are an international organization, and we work together with other player associations like EU athletes or other international Uniball players, and that's currently the way we're working. But we are international, and we have members from all over the world.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Suzanne, can I turn to you now? I think you'd agree that some of those figures were alarming, and I think that you're going to get into sort of the economic and financial equality of women's cycling now.
Yes, I am going to attempt to discuss that. Thank you for having me, and thank you for putting on this event. I do need to clarify that despite what has been printed, I'm not a doctor yet, but soon. So this presentation actually feels a bit like defending my dissertation. But although I'm not here to defend my thesis today, I will take my study as the main starting point of what I'm sharing with you today. So yeah, I will discuss more on the social norms that are prevalent in women's cycling and road cycling, and try to connect it to societal norms and sports norms, and see how that influenced the economic and financial equality question, kind of related to media and coverage and publicity, which I've been asked to do. So in 2017, I started my research at Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia. And the project was a sociological study that focused on gender and labor relations in this sport. Because it was in Australia, at a specific Australian context, but I also focused on professional women's road cycling more in general. Now in this talk, I will elaborate a bit more about what I actually did for my study and how it informed what I'm sharing with you here. The aim is to connect those dots. As a sociologist, the study that I did entailed the methodology of ethnography, which means that I aimed to immerse myself in the world of women's cycling, which means that I aimed to be where women's cycling is happening, to move through that world to get a sense of what women's cycling can be, experiencing and sensing it. And this resulted in a multi-level research where I witnessed women's cycling at the club level, where I joined a cycling club and tried to become a racing cyclist myself, which I was not. At national level, where I went to national races and interviewed riders who competed in a national competition. And thirdly, at world tour level, I observed for 7 months the World Tour races in Europe in the 2019 season, and I interviewed several professional and elite cyclists. So I observed, I interviewed, I participated, attempted to, I collected media pieces on women's cycling and much more. And all of these data I collected, I analyzed into themes relating to gender and labor relations. Now, that makes me not so much an expert on the economics and finances of women's cycling. But in my study, I do touch on how these social norms can influence and shape the labor situation of women in road cycling. So today I will discuss some of my findings and relate those to those notions and connect them to media, publicity, economics, and finances. Now, this was a very critical research, so you might not like what I have to say. My research findings show how many social practices in the sport actually reinforce a certain gender order where women are constructed as inferior to men and therefore deserve less. These practices are related to attitudes, feelings, and beliefs that relate to gender. Now, the first point on this slide, legacy of the history. We know road cycling is an old sport, and women's cycling also has a long history. Women have been racing bikes since the invention of the machine in the 1800s. But as a sport, it has been and remains a male-dominated, male-centered, and male-identified space. Women's journey has been obstructed by scientific theories about the female body, medical discourse, and moral arguments. Nonetheless, women of many different classes found different narratives that allowed them to cycle. The upper-class women used it as a social status symbol with the prerequisite to cycle like a lady. For the suffragette movement, cycling for freedom, or actually for money. Women were pro-bike riders since the start, and there actually was opportunity to out-earn male bike riders back then. But beside this long history, women's road cycling has not reached parity with men, as we've clearly understood from Iris's presentation. But for the last 7 to 10 years, the media, cyclists themselves, fans, have been discussing the progress of women's cycling and how right now is a pivotal moment to create a healthy and viable future for women's cycling, and how that now can be created. And one consideration in this narrative is the inclusion of women's events at men's races. Now, I've created this table where I've included very prominent men's races, Grand Tours and Monuments, Classics. And I included when they started, who organizes them, and the women's edition, and then the starting year of that. What we see here is that for the longest time, women have been ignored and excluded from these important races. It wasn't really until the 2000s where things started taking shape. I didn't include the history of the Tour de France for women, but next year perhaps. So this inclusion is celebrated. And I relate this positive association to the prestige that comes with these old races. As most of us probably know, and as I've said, road cycling is an old sport with many traditions, long history. And while the opinion on women's sport and women's cycling may have shifted since the time of commencement of this sport, the opinion on men's cycling is that it continues to be better than what women do, and that the old races are the most important thing in road cycling. And the two speakers before me have mentioned this already, and I think it's a thorn in the eye, as we say. But the gender marking of the events indicates that the women's event is not the main event. Tour de France or Tour de France Femme, but there is change happening. When we look at the Ronde van Vlaanderen, Flanders Classics have decided to call it the same name for both events, but on their website they make a distinction between men's events and women's events. Now, these old races carry much importance in the structure and culture of road cycling, and this importance is being internalized by the riders themselves. For example, when I asked one rider about the concerns of the Healthy Aging Tour about a future Paris-Roubaix for women, because they would be on at the same time, she said, we would definitely do Paris-Roubaix. I think like the Healthy Aging Tour, really hate to say this because I think they do a really good job, better than most races in the year. The organization is good, they have Livestream, and a lot of races don't. I think they really want to be World Tour, and they actually deserve it. They do everything right and they don't have World Tour status, whereas other races actually don't do everything right and do have it. So here we see how these old races are preferred over new modern races. And this shows how these organizations that want to create women's races, modern races, they cannot escape the larger structure of what professional cycling means. The history of professional cycling is male-centered and will advantage men over women, even when races are not associated with men's cycling. Women riders want to race the best races, and generally, in their world, the old races are constructed as the best. Now, to discuss the format of Grand Tours, which, that's a bit too far ahead. To discuss the Grand Tours, this is mostly absent in women's cycling, but most people would view the Giro Rossa as the Grand Tour of women's cycling. And despite the badly maintained, dangerous roads that these riders race on, the lack of TV coverage and the questionable accommodation for especially lower-ranked teams, it continues to carry appeal and desire for most racers to race it, because it's a relatively old, long stage race. It comes closest to what real cycling means, which is still constructed as men's cycling. This is an example of how the male status quo is internalized as the standard and of what counts. So while the inclusion of women's events is celebrated, it's not just about the inclusion, it's about how we are included. And the how is strongly related to symbolism around these events. And with symbolism, I mostly mean language and images, because everyday language and images have a profound meaning or a fundamental role in the construction and reinforcement of gender differences. And thus it's important to reflect on the how of our inclusion. For example, about 4 months ago, women's cycling sighed with relief and excitement because a Tour de France for women was announced. This welcoming message seemed to be a scoop for The Guardian. Their news article reflected a conversation of one of their journalists with Christian Prudhomme, the director of the ASO. Now, unfortunately, this scoop, the title, I would say, is the most exciting part about the news article. Because the quotes used in the article were quite cynical. It can be said ASO puts on the biggest cycling show annually, but their first press release on a Tour de France for women was included comments that kind of summarized into women better make us money or we won't do it again. Instead, they could have announced this news in a spectacular fashion, telling the world their plans. But this news article seemed full of reservations. Now, the legacy of male-centeredness and the male-identified history of road cycling continues into today's inclusion of women's events. Because yes, women can now race Ronde of Vlaanderen and hopefully a Tour de France next year. But again, this inclusion, how this is given shape, does not necessarily reflect total inclusion. Another example of this during my observations of elite professional women's road cycling was at the Finnish location of Dwars door Vlaanderen. There were flags displayed by a sponsor named Groep Daru, a construction material company. This sponsor had a secluded section along the finish, seemingly a VIP area. There were flags, there was an English bus, a tent, and there were men drinking beer. Now the flags displayed the following image. It's a bit tiny. The flag had an image of a woman, a sexualized woman on a bicycle with construction tools. This flag was one of the few images present at the race of women, which was an event for both men and women. At the finish location, the big buses of the men's teams, the sponsors carrying these flags, and the male fans took center stage. So this is symbolized as a gender practice that reproduced meaning of women as sexualized beings and not as serious athletes. As a 1.1 race, which was at the time the second highest class of races for women, Dwars door Vlaanderen is an important race for the women's calendar. And also, the race organizers, Flanders Classics, is a powerful actor in the field of women's cycling, or in road cycling in general, because they organize 5 other significant races for both men and women. So while this race was supposed to be about elite racing and women cyclists performing their athleticism and their professionalism, the men's race took center stage, and women were there was not a welcome environment created for women. Now, another example of what happens in publicity in women's cycling is trivialization and infantilization. Yeah, this is at the Giro Rossa at one of their, I think it's the H stage in 2019. The race was promoted by using a female squirrel. While at the same time, they had this amazing photo of Annemiek van Vleuten as a winning athlete. So this is the oldest, longest race for professional women's cycling, and the organizers used a feminized cartoon to promote it. And one thing that I also noticed at races, and that could be related to the financial situation of women's cycling, is merchandise. Get the next. Some races would have stands or vans selling merchandise, which would exclusively sell merchandise for men's teams or men's races. On the left, we see a stand at the Classicoa in Basque Country, which was exclusively male stuff. And at the Giro Rossa, which has always been a women's event, the Giro d'Italia merch was available, but nothing for Giro Rossa. So if such symbolism was more critically questioned, then decisions can be made where women cyclists are not sexualized, trivialized, infantilized. Mind you, most of these professional athletes are referred to as girls or meisjes, which undermines their performances. We need to situate women as serious athletes. And one race on the calendar that does a good job at this, I would argue, is the OVO Energy Tour in England. The symbolism of races and events and teams needs to represent the respect, recognition, and legitimacy that women cyclists deserve. And this needs to be shown to an audience. And much research on professional women's sport is suggesting that sports need to invest in attracting women as fans. I found some data in the US on the economic value of women, if you will. And it shows that women control about $20 trillion, which is 85% of consumer spending. They are 47% of the civilian workforce. They control 51% of personal wealth. They influence 70 to 80% of all consumer purchasing. They make 80% of travel decisions, 80% of healthcare decisions. Women dominated the second running boom. And as we can see during the pandemic, women dominated the Strava, the Strava boom. Women exceed men in the purchase of shoes, apparel, technology, services, and events. I believe numbers in Europe would be similar. So I think we need to invest in data collection, in research on fan engagement and fandom. During my research, I made quite of a distinction between fans in cycling because there were the spectators, there were the participants of the social events, and there were then some hardcore women's cycling fans that would attend as well. But I found it difficult to find any information about who the cycling fan is. Who is the women's cycling fan? Who are the people that follow women's cycling? And I think because the Women's World Tour, just like the Men's World Tour, is a big responsibility of the UCI. So since they own the league, there's a responsibility there to create this data and know what is going on in the space and market, or the market that they operate in. Now, there's many more topics that in my study I found that could be related to I think, economics and financial situation. But most of all, I think I'd like to just conclude how there's tolerance throughout the sport and acceptance of certain norms that create a natural order of things in which we then reproduce what we know, the status quo. I found the gender labor division is at club level, national level, and the World Tour level, where we see women particularly in supportive roles and men in natural leadership roles. There's a secrecy around pay where riders are not allowed to discuss what they earn or what they not earn with other teammates. Some teams actually expect their riders to be financially supported by their families. And this notion of gratefulness also produces an acceptance for less than ideal situations. Overall, there's this lingering assumption that women will never or should never get the rewards as men, the same rewards as men, because the women's product is not as commercially viable. In the end, these women want to be professional cyclists. They want to perform at their best without the worrying of paying their bills or having savings, without the worry of abuse, of financial exploitation, without the worry if they are being taken care of when they get an injury in their high-risk sport that they are involved in. They just want to cycle, and they want for their athletic performances to be respected and shown to an excited audience. But as long as just cycling is done so in the image of a male-centered and male-identified activity, it remains difficult to reach that economic and financial equality. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. And I think, indeed, you warned us that there would be some uncomfortable things to hear. We also saw some uncomfortable things. The grain of hope, perhaps, there was the figures that you gave as far as women's buying and purchasing power is concerned, because that's obviously a strength that can be built upon. I'd like to turn over to you, Gwenda, now, and perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about empowering women in sport. I think that sort of follows on very neatly from what Suzanne has just outlined.
Thank you. In our pursuit for a better world through sports, gender equality is an important goal. There are still too many barriers for women in sport, young and old. This applies to athletes as well as to coaches, officials, and administrators. Empowering women in sports wants to break down barriers, both in terms of policy and on the field. First of all, I would like to tell you a little bit, a small story, why we have created a Women Task Force. In 2017, I was on the flight with Dominique Monami, and we came back from Lithuania, and we were present at the Forum for Women. And then we were thinking, okay, what do we have learned? We heard a lot of blah, 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 but we didn't have any action points where we could work on. And then we were thinking about, okay, when we are coming back in Belgium and we are going to the Olympic Committee, we have nothing. We have not a working group. We even not have even a commission for women in sports. So that's why we asked the board at the Olympic Committee if we could have a commission. And when you see that it was 2017 in October, and we only got the green light from the Olympic Committee in October 2018, it took really 1 year to have not a commission, but a working group. But I hope now with our new president, Jean-Michel, that we can have a commission. So we started our Women Task Force with Dominique Gavage. She is the chair of our task force, together with Dominique Monami. And of course, we have also two male people who are working in the Olympic Committee, staff members, and they are helping us also with all our initiatives. Our goal is really to identify the barriers that limit women's participation at different levels, coaching, federations, board of directors, etc. Recommend initiatives and proposals in order to have in the long term better gender equality. Of course, you can say, and we will start with something, but it should be on long term and not say, okay, we will do this in 1 year and then the rest we will see. So this is really important that we do some things also on long term. So, of course, we had our Women Task Force, but then the next step was, okay, what will we do with it? So we started to organize a survey, and we had the survey online. The duration was 2 weeks. We did it in the first part of 2019, and our groups who worked with the survey were the female administrators from the federations, the female athletes who were in the database of Team Belgium, female officials, and I mean with the officials was really umpires in our sports on national and international level, and also the female coaches who were also in a data from Team Belgium. When you see the result of the survey 2019, we had a participation of 214 responses, so 214 people. And as you see directly, the coaches, they were very tiny, so we had only 6 female coaches who could answer on our survey, and that was a little bit shocking for us. So after the survey, what we have organized, in November 2019, we organized a colloquium with a lot of training and networking in Louvain. We had 120 participants, and what was also quite good, there were not only female participants, but also male participants, because we just need to work together. So, and we are not feminists. So, and I must say that was really very successful. So what we have done after our survey of 2019, we had a brainstorming on the 7th of February with representatives of ADEPS, Port Vlaanderen, IESF, Panathlon, universities, etc. We had also meetings with the RTBF and VRT just to see how they are dealing with the promotion of the image of women on the media. And of course, they were telling us, yes, we are putting already a lot of women on the television, but it's not enough. So when we are saying this sentence that the people of the media don't like it very much, but whatever, I do mention it. We had also several participations in working groups at European level, such as the All-In process and the EQUIP, and also Dominique Monami is representative in the expert group on gender equality of the European Commission. We also participated in several symposia, for example, the Knowledge Day of Gender from Sport Vlaanderen and all kinds of other symposia. And of course, meanwhile, there were a lot of interviews in the written and audiovisual press. This is also very important for us because, okay, you can work on things, but it should be also in the press. So. In October 2020, we launched our platform within the Olympic Committee of Belgium, the Empowering Women in Sports. And why? Because we had a collaboration with the Game Changers. It's also a group of athletes and former athletes. And their focus was really to help more young people in all kinds of sports. And that's why we decided to work with them together, because it's a little bit silly that they are doing their thing and we are doing our thing. It's better that we can have some initiatives and actions together. And of course, we still have our own projects also. So that's quite important. Afterwards, we were in the Senate for the Advisory Committee on Equal Opportunities. There was a hearing on the wage gap. It's quite known, of course. We decided also to have a second edition of our survey in 2020, also for the athletes, coaches, officials, and administrators. Also a consumer survey by iVox concerning the image of women in sport. And that was quite a good one, because this was not only athletes or coaches who were answering the survey, but it was just the people on the street who were telling what they were thinking about the image of women in sport. Then the publication of the results of the surveys, we did a press release on the 8th of March, the well-known International Women's Day, with the big title, Women are mentally at least as strong as men. And guess what? It was not picked up. So it was not in the papers, not anything. So that was really, we were not so happy with that, but we are continuing. So that's the most important thing. We had also our participation in the Olympic coaching platform in January by webinar, because of course with the COVID, we could only have a webinar. So, and I'm really happy that we can sit now also together. So it's a hybrid webinar. We had also several meetings with the Game Changers, just to see what they are doing, what we are doing, which projects, and also to see which projects we can do together. The networking is, of course, very important for the women. And, of course, Dominique Monami is still continuing with her expert group on gender equality from the European Commission. the results of the survey 2020. Instead of 2 weeks, we had now 1 month of the duration of the survey. And again, we took also again the same group. So we have again the female administrators of the national federations and now also for the leagues. The first time we didn't input the leagues in it. Then we had again the female athletes and the female coaches from the database from Team Belgium, and again also the female officials, national and international. But we do saw that it's changed because we got now 577 responses. So we were quite happy, and as you can see, we had now 17 coaches. So we thought, okay, we have already some coaches who responded on our survey also. And let's say that I will take about 3 topics of our last survey, which is the financial aspect remains a major concern, as we heard also from the former colleagues, especially for athletes. 78% say they have unequal access to or less financial resources than their male colleagues, which let's say is not normal. The media attention. 78 of the athletes indicate that women receive less media attention. And 77% of all the respondents, including 91% of the athletes, indicate that the media has a huge responsibility to promote women's sport. And the third one is representation in sports structures. More than 60% of the respondents believe that women are underrepresented in sport facilities. Nearly 50% of respondents think it's more difficult for women to get a certain position in sport. And that's something that I know for me, it counts also. And then 40% administrators and officials are in favor of a quota minimum and consider quotas as determinants for gender equality. The main counter-argument repeatedly put forward by these people is that positions should be allocated on the basis of skills and knowledge. I know that there are a lot of things to say about quota. There are a lot of pro, a lot of contra. But for me, the main thing is really, you can have quota, you can start with it, but please afterwards you need to choose the people because they have the skills and the knowledge. Not only because it's a woman and she's wearing a skirt. I think we had a very good example last Friday with the election of the president. I will not tell everything, but this was a very good example. Please take someone with the skills, not because he's a man or she's a woman. Then, of course, in our survey, we had also the open questions. I will go quickly through it. For example, now for the administrators, we have the difficulties. For example, lack of recognition. Women need to make more effort to be taken seriously. Lack of female candidates, difficulty in entering the team. Lack of time, male environment, devaluation of women, minority groups, lack of self-confidence, lack of commitment and ambition. Then we have some solutions. We will not say, these are the solutions, bam, and that's it. No, it's just solutions that can help. So we can work with a minimum quota, define the criteria for a given function and act transparently in the process, creating gender equality financially, commercially, and politically, assign functions on the basis of competences, promotional campaigns, involve models, organize training sessions, for example, networking. Then the results for the open questions for the athletes: wage inequality, remuneration, lack of support, sponsorship, of course, no equality, lack of opportunity or lack of recognition, then lack of visibility, attention in the media, still some stereotypes like in the masculine world, the man-female comparison, and then a lack of female executive. And the solutions: performance-based pay equity, increase visibility to increase revenue, promotion of the sport for the women, advertising campaigns, which is very important also, increase visibility, broadcast media, and very important, focus on values and performance, and not because they are handsome or like we had with the flag from Susan, who showed that, and it's kind of a sexy image. But please look at the values and the performance of the athlete. Social networks and also breaking stereotypes. Then the results of the open questions for the officials: lack of respect, assumptions, less efficient, for example, inappropriate behavior or gestures, intimidation or insults. And of course, I know some things are also for men. Men are also sometimes got intimidated or insulted. But for female officials, sometimes also the dress code is very difficult. No suitable facilities, for example, changing rooms. I heard it from, for example, in the football sometimes is a problem. Then a lack of time or availability. And then dominant politics of men. And then for the solutions, we have introduction of a quota again, gender pay equity, better media coverage involving female leaders, assign functions on the basis of competences, mentality to change, initiate projects, workshops, motivating women as officials. And then the last but not least, of course, the coaches. This is sometimes a difficult work-life balance as a female coach, lack of respect, also a men's environment, so women are not taken sometimes seriously. Also here we have stereotypes. Women should coach female athletes, which is not always correct. Lack of recognition and credibility. And then the minority group create new opportunities. Publicize and promote, inform and raise awareness, reports, documentaries, work with a minimum quota, change of mentality again, focus on performance and results, involve role models, and gender pay budget balance. I told you about the iVox poll who was asked for the people on the street. So it was asked to men and women. 64% of the population thinks that women's sport is not at the same level as men's sport. 76% of the population thinks that women's sport should be more widely reported in the media. 68% of the population doesn't think it's normal for women to receive lower premiums than men because there's less public presence. 60% of the population believes that women are not sufficiently represented in managerial positions. 60% of the population thinks there are too few female officials, and 57% of the population thinks there are too few female coaches. So now what's next for us, for the Women Task Force? We will have a second edition of our colloquium. It will be at the end of 2021, beginning 2020. It depends on the COVID situation, of course. Then we will have again and start to activate our sessions, brainstorming with the stakeholders about the result of the survey 2020. There will be activities together with the game changers and together with the federations, the clubs, etc. We will have a lot of networking. We will have the training sessions, and we will still participate in our different projects like EQUIP and also in our high-level group at the European Commission. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gwenda. And, you know, what I really liked was that feeling that there's a sort of a plan of action. And, you know, it's not just a question of analysing what the situation is, but there are actions that we're going to take to change things for the better. I think I'm just looking to see whether we have time for a few questions or we should just go on to the next panel. Yeah, we'll move on to the next panel. So I'd like to thank you all for your speeches and may I invite the next speakers, please, to come to the platform. So we'll move straight on to the next session, and the idea here is to have more of a sort of a dialogue. We've got half an hour, which is give or take, which isn't very long. I'll start in exactly the same way I did before and just sort of introduce the people who are sitting on the platform with me. On my left is Marisa Fernandez-Esteban, who is a lawyer by training and is the deputy head of the European Commission's Sports Unit. On my right is Griet Langedock, who's a board member of the Ghent-Wevelgem cycling race for elite road cycling. And on her right is Eline Berings, a Belgian former Olympic hurdler, an European indoor champion, and now a sports psychologist. We're also going to hear, and we're going to hear now first from Caterina Nash from the Czech Republic, who many of you will know is a former mountain bike national champion, a European bronze medalist, participated 6 times in World Cup competitions, and a member of the UCI Management Committee. So if we could perhaps hear Caterina's message now. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Caterina Nash and I have been a professional cyclist for over 20 years now. The nice thing about having a long career is that I've seen how far we've come. At the same time, I'm fully aware how much further we have to go in order to reach equality in cycling. I'm pretty excited that you chose gender equality as the main topic for your seminar today. It is a crucial topic, and I wish you productive conversation. As a racer, I watched and actively participated in development of women's cycling. For example, a long time ago, the prize money in cyclocross was 1/10 for the women compared to the men. Back then, my teammate Georgia Gold decided to start a petition. We collected enough signatures, got enough momentum, earned equal prize money at all the events across the United States, and this eventually led to changes at the governing body. Entering this upcoming cyclocross season, the prize money is equal for both men and women across all the UCI events. At the same time, while at the UCI, I've been part of some major decisions, one of them being equal field for road Olympic race in Paris. As you know, the work is not done yet, but I believe as long as we keep making changes from the top all the way to grassroots level and everywhere in between, there is a bright future for female in cycling. I certainly have enjoyed my long career, and I hope every rider out there who chooses to be a professional cyclist has the opportunity to do the same thing. Thank you.
Asking Mrs. Fernandez-Esteban first. We've heard quite a lot from people in the sport about the issues. We've heard academic appraisal also of the situation, and it seems that there's a lot to do. And clearly it's important to have support at political level and from the member states to try and help change things. And I wonder if you could start off by telling us what the Commission's position is on this, what you're doing, and the road forward, the map forward, if you like.
Yes, thank you. So I'm very happy to be here with you today to tell you about how we promote gender equality in sports in the European Commission. I would start by saying that gender equality is a principle enshrined in our European treaties. It is also a fundamental right, but more than that, it has acquired an important, particular importance in the von der Leyen Commission. It has become a main priority for the von der Leyen Commission, and there is the EU gender strategy, the strategy for gender equality, 2020-2025, and sport contributes to this gender equality strategy. And I would like to say that I was watching President von der Leyen yesterday's State of the Union speech, and I must say she was accompanied by Mrs. Bebe Vio, who is a Paralympic champion, wheel fencing champion, champion in Rio, champion in Tokyo. And I've never seen sport, and especially female sport, so high in the political agenda as yesterday, together with President von der Leyen. So I've seen an incredible growing in the relevance of sport and gender equality in sport in the last years, with these important political endorsements by the President von der Leyen herself yesterday. We saw it. But also we have our means to support gender equality. We do that by first gathering evidence. So we work together with the Council of Europe in the All-In project, and together we are cooperating with the Institute for Gender Equality in Vilnius. The idea here is to prepare indicators about gender equality in sport and how it evolves, because it's important to see this progressing, as we have seen here also in the previous presentations concerning cycling in the Netherlands or in Europe, but we want to be more comprehensive. So we are building up these indicators because it's important to measure how the things evolve, not a picture, but rather an evolution. We have published also two or three studies that also serve as a basis for this evidence-based building, which is the study on gender-based violence in sport, 2016, mapping analysis of education skills for coaches from a gender perspective in 2017, and we also published in 2019 Safeguarding Children in Sport, which was also protecting women from violence and girls is one important element of gender equality in sport. So we have done that in 2019. We continue to work with the Council of Europe on gender. That's evidence building. Evidence through studies and indicators. But more than that, we have an instrument which is Erasmus+, which is our program, known for education, but it has also youth and sport in it. And we have a budget now for 7 years of almost 500 million. And I must say, in 2014, we had a recommendation of how to mainstream gender. And this is really at the backbone of the Erasmus+, gender equality across the board in all projects. So this is one of the elements that is measured and is assessed when evaluating projects in Erasmus+. So it is really across the board. Beyond that, we have specific projects to promote several aspects of gender equality in sport. For example, we have the project Voices, which was a wonderful project to build a database of those victims of violence in sport, encouraging them and making more easy for those victims to really become, speak up and be supported. So this is the project Voices. Another very interesting project, SCORE, is about promoting female leadership in coaching, supporting female coaches. So this is also another interesting Erasmus+ project. There is another, there are many, but I just selected a few just to tell you and to give you an impression how we promote several and different aspects of gender equality in sport. The Girls on Track, very interesting, promoting gender equality in Formula 1. But very interesting because it's promoting from young talents, teenage, girls to show them how the different aspects of how the different employments employed in Formula One, from engineering to being a pilot and all of so a comprehensive view of what this has to offer. She runs a very interesting project involving more than 2,000 girls from 35 countries, empowering them in running. So this is just a few examples of projects that that Erasmus Plus is supporting, and in gender equality, and we will continue to do so. So this is our main instrument, Erasmus Plus, but we also have extra money that the European Parliament gave us to implement projects, and. Again, here, promotion of gender equality is one of the key elements to evaluate the project. So it's really, the way to mainstream this in funding is really to consider it one of the elements in the assessment of projects. And this is how we do it when we evaluate projects. And of course, we have also we have prizes to highlight projects that promote inclusion through sport, the Be Inclusive EU Sport Awards. Promotion of gender equality is one of the elements that is considered to select the projects that are selected every year for the promotion of inclusion through sport. And the Be Active Awards, linked to the European Week of Sport, again, gender equality, one of the main elements that is considered in the selection of projects. From the high-level jury that selected the projects last week to the projects themselves, there is really this emphasis on gender equality. And finally, let me refer to something that is going to happen next week, is the opening of the European Week of Sport. It's the 7th edition of the European Week of Sport. Almost 70 million Europeans have participated in the 6 previous editions. It's our big flagship promoting sport for everybody across the board, across generations, across genders. So, and this is really a moment to promote gender equality. And we will launch, Commissioner Gabriel will launch the Healthy Lifestyle for All. So really to bring the benefits of sport across society, across generations and genders to everybody. This is something we will promote as from next week. And finally, let me come to Bebe Bio, this wonderful Paralympic athlete who is now also European ambassador for the European Week of Sport, and she will be in Bled in Slovenia to launch the opening of the European Week of Sport 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean,
thank you. Thank you.
It certainly sounds as though there's a lot going on, and the Commission is quite busy with that. But we all know that you need the member states absolutely behind the agenda to sort of push it forward. And I just wondered, if there are any particular member states that are sort of very keen on promoting this, and also whether you could advise us whether France in particular, given that the French presidency starts at the beginning of next year, has this on its agenda. Because if it's not on the political agenda, we're not going to make any advance.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me of this important element, because one very important high-level policy document is the EU Work Plan for Sport. It is really adopted by the Council of Ministers for Sport, and it has indicators on, it is really a plan of deliverables for the years to come. It's 2021 and 2024, and there is really a list of deliverables that will be there. And on gender equality, it is one of the lines of work. From the behalf of the Commission, we will have the ongoing high-level group of gender equality, and we expect that there will be a policy document with recommendations and with an action plan coming out of the high-level group of gender equality in sport by the end of the year. And there will be a conference coinciding with the French presidency. The French presidency is very much interested in everything that is inclusion and gender. So this will happen in the first, let's say between January and March, still to be agreed, will be the presentation of this action plan from the high-level group on gender that is ongoing. But beyond that, there will be still political work, of course, going on, continue, and there will be their plan Council conclusions on gender equality under the Spanish presidency, second part of 2023. So the work will continue to build and to be delivered. And also I look forward to see what the high-level group of gender will put on the table and suggestions for the Commission, for the Member States, and really to see how we can implement that.
Well, that sounds very promising. Thank you for that. I mean, I'd like to turn to Greet and Aline now. And, you know, I don't know if you have any sort of particular comments about what's going on at the EU level, but I'd also be quite interested to hear, you know, how you found the Belgian government responsive to the concerns that you have as far as, you know, particularly as far as cycling is concerned, but maybe other sports as well.
Well, first of all, I come, of course, out of a different sports, track and field, and that is actually, as an athlete, I experience as a very, very gender equal sports. We run together. We don't have a female 100 meter and the normal 100 meter. We just have the 100 meter for men and for women. Also, I think the salaries are quite similar. The prize money is quite similar. So I think track and field is actually in that part maybe an example that if you put just men and women all the time together and you bring them together and you present them the same way, that you end up in having similar attention and similar rewards, and then you of course can get also similar sponsorships and attention. Look at our star Nafitiam in the Olympic Games. So I think track and field is maybe an example, but what we do see is that when you look in the club levels, for example, you see a lot of female coaches, but once you start going higher and higher, you see less and less women. You see less women in the leadership roles. You see suddenly they seem to disappear, and that's an interesting question, I think, of today also. Why is that, and how can we change it? That women in the leadership roles they stay and they go for the highest positions. But of course,
I have to just sort of interject there and say you see that in business as well. So I mean, this is a sort of a common theme across the piece, I think. But
yeah, it's like we all agree that women have their jobs and their opportunities in to start with the kids and with the young athletes and the promising people. But as soon as you go higher up, if you look at the basketball team, for example, there's a lot of male coaches and a lot of male physical coaches, and I think there's many reasons for that, and also women need to step up and to go with that and to go for these high level jobs. I agree with saying we need to look at the skills and everything, but the question is if we do look at the similar way to the skills we demand from women and men at this moment, and how we look at it. So I think, yeah, there's a big gap still. And one remark that I wanted to maybe also say today is we talk, of course, a lot of prize money, and then we compare to the sports where there's a lot of money, like, for example, male cycling and male soccer players. But I believe that we need to most of all talk about create a baseline that for every sport, female, man, the baseline needs to be there, the salaries needs to be there, opportunities needs to be there, media needs to be there. And then you will have women that in the end earn as much as the top man. But I think that the baseline should be the main concern, that as many women as men can have the opportunity to go to the highest level.
Yeah. Greet.
Hello.
Over to you. I mean, maybe more from a sort of a cycling perspective, and I don't know, you know, if you wanted to say anything about.
I think. Look, I look to the facts more from an economic perspective. As a former organizer, I was never in the fairy tale. I was in the real hard world. So I heard some things today which are a bit of a fairy tale, like things like, oh, women are not the main event. Well, the bitter reality is that all the women events in cycling, or almost all the women events in cycling, are paid by the men events. So I think we should be realistic on that base. And I think there are two topics we should really divide. The one topic is the economic reality. There is less money in women's sports, and the reasons why are different reasons. Less media coverage, less interest of sponsors, but this is really rising. Unbelievable how women's cycling has changed in the last 5 years. Unbelievable. I could have never thought I would be living this fairy tale. But next to that, we have some other topics where there can be no compromise. And I think things like safety, and safety on the road, of course, but certainly safety as an athlete, having the right infrastructure, having the same having a federation who is well organized. These are the things we cannot have a compromise on it. So there we have to go to equality as soon as possible. And then you have the economic perspective, and that's like same prize money and same wages. Sorry, there is an economic reality. Sure. And also with organizers, the reason why there are women or female events is because of the fact that man races are doing well, or certain man races are doing well, and they decided to invest some of the money in women races. So sorry, Iris, that there are not that much races on the World Tour calendar of women, but that's the plain reality. ISO, same thing with ISO. They are really forced to organize a Tour of France for women. They are forced to organize La Course and things like that by the public opinion, perhaps also by their sponsor. But that doesn't work because, for example, this year at La Course, the female riders or the female teams were, and I'm looking to Alke, who will be from Trek Segafredo, who will be aware of that situation. The riders, the female riders, had to start really early in the morning, really early. And their hotels were over 100 kilometers from the start because the priority were given to the men. So it doesn't have any sense to force or oblige people to do something they are not willing to do. But I also remembered what it is said, which is really strong, and let's say, okay, let's take control over the sports. That's a strong saying, but can you imagine that some of the women cyclists or former women cyclists would say, you know what, I'm going to look for an organization in my environment. I'm going to go over there and say, hey guys, do you feel like organizing a race for the women? You know what? Because I'm your woman. I'm going to organize this for you. And I'm sure we can have a positive vibe this way. And this is how I did it in Ghent-Wevelgem. I was the only woman over there. And at a certain moment, I said, I think it's time to have a female race. But we are going to organize it, or I am going to organize it. I'm going to take my responsibility to organize it on the same level as the men. But I still know that it is paid by the benefits or the profits from the men's race. So some economic reality, and I think we should focus on the right things, like saying, okay, safe environment, federation, good infrastructure, things like that. And next to that, we should really invest on media coverage. Mm-hmm. Once we get the media coverage, we get the sponsors. Once we get the sponsors, we get the same wages, we get the same prize money. So I think it's it's circular and not a whole pile of problems or things we should start working on.
So I hear you saying women need to step up to the plate to organise their own event. But I wanted to come back to this issue about media coverage, because the media coverage and the sponsorship is sort of interlinked, right? Yeah. If you don't get the sponsorship, you don't get the media coverage. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, you know, finding the sponsors maybe. And also, one personal observation, I see in the UK, for example, that there are now lots of female football commentators, you know, from female international football who are on television, you know, week after week, commentating on men's football games, on male football games. And that gives them a sort of a position of authority, you know. I mean, is that something that there could be more of in cycling, for example? And, you know, might one of the solutions be to get that media coverage and to get that recognition, to somehow sort of develop a group of cycling commentators in the media? But what do you think?
We have the same thing. We have the same evolution here in Belgium. We have, for example, Imke Courtois and other female analysts who really commentate on the men's football games or soccer games. And we also have the same thing happening in cycling, because Lieselotte Croix is a female commentator on Belgian television. And now with the Worlds coming up, she's also going to do one evening, be analyst of the men's race.
Yes.
So for her, she has to make a change. I don't know that much of the men's peloton. I have to make a change, but being an analyst. So really, certainly that's something we can do.
And presumably from a psychological perspective, Aline, that's a good development.
Yeah, it's a good start, and I think it's all about breaking a certain cycle, and I agree in one way that there is the reality at the moment, economically also, but it shouldn't be a reason to keep saying it's like that and we don't need to change it. And like I say, I come out of sports that this difference is not even there, so it can be changed, and I think it's a long way to go, but yeah, the proposals I agree with bringing the separate races for women and everything, but I do think that you need to try at some point to just keep it together in a way, and understand it's different to run the 100 meters and then the 100 meters men and women after each other. It's different than a race that takes 3 hours or 4 hours or even more, so I understand the difficulty in that, and every sport has their own reasons, but I think we need to keep thinking how you can exactly bring the attention, bring the show, bring the media, bring the sponsors, and like that the sport.
But this is what is happening now in cycling. We have Tour of Flanders, we have Gent-Wevelgem, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and things like that. And yeah, we abuse the media attention and the VIP attendance and the public attendance to draw the attention towards the female races. And then if you can also oblige from politics side on to get these things also covered on television, this is something that could happen, because everything starts with coverage, with media attention, everything. And once you get this, you get sponsors who said, oh, we're really interested in we also need some more storytelling. Do you, for example, know, Elke is here from Trek Segafredo, they have a men team and they have a women team. But the women over there have the same minimum wages, not what is obliged by UCI, but they have the same minimum wages as the men have. But that's a story nobody knows. So start telling these good practices. Sponsors are, for example, Jumbo-Visma. Visma is a software company in HR, so a really female world, human resources, and they visited one of the races, and they saw there was no bus for the ladies. There was only a camper, and then the sponsor say, "Oh my God, next year there has to be a bus." Okay, what does a bus cost? We'll give you extra budget on that. So there are so many good stories and good practices to tell. We also have to emphasize what is positive and do together. And something like today, okay, they're all women standing here, but I'm convinced we also need the men. We have to work together on having more gender equality and equity in sports and in the whole world.
Yeah. I'd like to ask the audience if you've got any questions that you'd like to put. I'm mindful of the fact that you haven't had the opportunity to intervene. If anybody would like to ask a question, please raise your hand.
Well, just a remark from over here, but I didn't hear anything on the Paralympic cycling. Is that an issue? Oh, repeat for the audience at home.
Would you just like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, of course. My name is Jos Verschuren. I'm the Program Director, Sports Management at the University of Brussels. And we're going to start quite soon, in next January, by the way, with an expert class in cycling management. So we are doing our tour in this audience. But my reflection was, What about Paralympic cycling, women Paralympic cycling? Is there any attention for that? I see your head going like.
Yes, the inclusion of people with disability is also one of, it's very high in the European Commission's agenda. We have this strategy of inclusion of people with disability, and sport, of course, contributes to it. We support with Erasmus Plus many projects of inclusion of Paralympics, and the philosophy here is really to support grassroots, I would say, from grassroots to Paralympics. That's the idea. So we support many projects. We have, as I say, Bebe Bio is one of the European ambassadors of the European Week of Sport, which really gives visibility to Paralympic athletes and how they are role models. And she's a female Paralympic champion, so better than that. And as I say, she was yesterday with President Ursula von der Leyen in the State of the Union speech. So I've never seen such a high visibility of Paralympics. And Erasmus Plus is, of course, supports Paralympics. I would say more than that. Inclusion is really the backbone of Erasmus, of the new Erasmus Plus until 2027. We have supported in the past the Winter Paralympics. We have supported that, sponsored the Paralympic Games when they happen in Europe, because we have to, Erasmus Plus is in Europe. So when this happens in Europe, we support. And beyond that, we have the Be Inclusive EU Sport Awards, as I mentioned. And regularly, let's say, the inclusion of athletes, of grassroots projects that include people with disability are regularly awarded. Last year, one of the winners was a Belgian organization that includes people with disability, offers different sports for people with disability and without disability together. But every year, one of the winners is related to the inclusion of people with disability. So we give visibility with this Be Inclusive EU Sport Awards too. So it is really very high in our agenda. And as I said, Bebe Bio, the Paralympic champion, will be in the opening of the European Week of Sport next week in Bled. So that's how we see it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presence here. I have a question. What would you see as a role for the international bodies, for example, the Olympic Committee and the international sport federations? Because I think they have an influence on the sport, at least. So what could be their role in the gender equality debate?
One of you.
Well, there is a big part they can play. First of all, I would like them to more emphasis on the safety of female athletes. We discussed a few times there are a lot of problems in women's cycling, and UCI is not doing enough, nor the federations are. So this is something they should really be their concern and take some severe actions towards that. And a second thing is, and I'm referring to what Gwenda said, we really have to think about a quota, or we could do it on another way. We could say, okay, if we need board members in national federations and things like that, we're not going to talk about quota. We're going to look to the job description, and we're going to look if the competences on the job description are really what this job needs, or are they the mainly male competences, because we can do things in another way as a woman. And if you look to a job description, most of the competences that are written down are, manly-based competences. And I also know all about it. So yeah, that's something else than saying, okay, we're going to talk about a quota, because I'm not for a quota fan. I also think the most competent person has to be elected or has to be in that function, but we could have some kind of quality check on the job descriptions.
Ellie, do you want?
Yeah, it's a complicated topic, and I do believe that at some point you need to really go for a change, because I mean, you can say all of the, I agree with many of that, but at some point I do think you need to dare to jump, and it doesn't mean it needs to be 50-50 or whatever, but really to go for, okay, because I think if you look at the qualities right now, you can also say every people on the board is not always having all the qualities that they should have. And we do associate indeed a lot of leadership roles still with masculinity and masculine behavior or masculine qualities, whatever that might be, because that's also a discussion you can have. So I understand a little bit the difficulty with quota, that you feel like, oh, if you then get a job as a woman, people will say, yeah, it's because you were the woman and not because you had the qualities. But I do believe that at some point you need to dare to say, look, why there is no science or no reason to explain why at the moment it's only maybe 10% or 5% of women there. So why not say, like, we believe that if you go for the skills and go for the competences, that you will end up with much more women in the boards. And it's a different perspective, I think, but you need to dare to go for it.
Patrick, yeah.
Yes, hello. I'm Patrick van Kampenhout, representing the president of Panathlon International, Pierre Zappelli. And I had, in fact, a question that we discussed together. So we hear the fantastic things that could be going on after a wrap-up that we make. And we are talking about maybe resolutions going from the European Union. If we drop down to the national level, if we drop down to the federations, if we drop down to the schools. So I think it's very important, like with my colleague Gwenda in the Olympic Committee, we will also drop down to the schools with some philosophy and also a very gender philosophy. If we go by the basic players, in fact, the young girls and boys, but in that case for the girls, it would be very interesting that in schools, the federations, the Panathlon, the Olympic Committee can join arms together and do something really from back basic, really the first step. And I think if like young girls will hear that, in fact, they are not a second-rank person, but that they are equal to everyone, and that they can start from very young age to go for it. And I think there is already an improvement, but why not emphasize this, that we have a strong message? And I think in the schools, there it should be start. Of course, the parents can help, but I think the schools and federations can help a lot.
Comments or?
It's actually one of my notes here was for me also my personal, it starts at the base and not at the top. We look many times at the top and we compare things we see there. But I do believe, like also schools, but also clubs, like I said, you do see so many women there and you do see sort of equality there. Why, to look like, why does it end somehow and how can we change it? How can we make sure that these young girls, young women, they continue in their development and they continue to grow to whatever they want to be? And I think I agree with that should be the main focus. And then I'm sure that everything else will change. It will take a long time maybe, but we need to keep doing that, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I think given the time we've already run quite over, that I should draw this panel to a close now. Thank you all very much.
Hi.
One more. Last question.
Yes, last I'm going to keep it short. Hi everybody. I'm Elke from the Women Peloton. We're a new project here in Belgium. We also want to try to close the gap, maybe, by investing in knowledge for women in cycling, because I think that's also a really important topic. We can talk about media coverage and everything, but if you look at the studies, all the studies in sport are for men. Nothing is based or not really based on women's body. Our body works completely different. We carry a baby, we have the menopause, we start ovulating. We have all those things that really, I think, is also important to keep in mind. To close the gap, we need to invest in knowledge. That's just one thing I wanted to say.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'd like to invite Antonella Pederiva to make the closing remarks now. Antonella.
So, dear sisters in arms, it is a challenging task to come to some closing remarks because I had prepared a little script. But after listening to you, I've changed my plans. So here you go. First thing, we have discussed about cycling, but we have discussed also about women empowerment and equality in general. Today's is about cycling, but we can drag something from the general discussion on empowerment into cycling in our action plan. Just let me open a small parenthesis on this quota, which is quota issue that is very challenging and sensitive for men and women. Every time we discuss it, also among women, we can't necessarily agree. And I suggest you a very wise word that Christine Lagarde suggested recently to tackle this issue, that is targets. Let's talk about targets before talking about quotas. And it's slightly different because targets is a process. It's less aggressive than quota because immediately, also in the organization where I operate, in the business, as soon as you talk about quota, people start to be nervous. If you talk about targets, everybody's comfortable because it's work in progress. So just a little parenthesis on that. Second thing I would like to do now is to go through very rapidly all the interventions of today and tell you what you left to me, which is subjective, obviously. And I would start with Iris. Iris, I liked your approach on integrity. It's equality, but it's integrity. The issue has to be tackled as a whole, a holistic approach to women's situations today. So it's integrity that is also comprising equality, but it's not only equality. So I like that very much. And I also noted that you are doing a lot of things, and I will come to that in the second part of my conclusion. Suzanne, changes of society. We need to change the societal pattern in which we are. We need to change maybe a little bit the legacy of the past. And women are the first in the row to do that, but we can't do that without men. And then I come to you, Gwenda. You are confronted as a power woman with men. It has to be done together. Not necessarily in opposition, sometimes also with a fight, of course. So we have to stand up and defend our point of view, but we have to do that together for the good of society. Then, Marisa, we know the commitment of the institutions, and it's great to have you here. You talked about the initiatives that are ongoing. I'm very pleased to hear that the Spanish presidency will tackle this issue. These conclusions of the presidencies sometimes are on the most absurd themes. Finally, something that is concrete and talks to a lot of people. And I think that in our new dynamic here, there will be maybe a way to contribute to that. I also take a note that there will be more focus on sports at the institutions level in the next few years, and that's great news. Ellen, so I liked very much your idea that we have to do things together, men and women, and that as soon as you have a package for both, women can fight their corner and define their own roles and have their own specificity. So this growing together, I think it's quite important. And also I take a good note of the media role that is obviously paramount in order to promote our cause. And Grit, thank you very much to taking us back to the reality of life. Business is business. The market decides who's earning more, who has more value. This is real. We have not to be in the fairy tale. You are very right on that. But there are some elements, namely the values, that can change this dynamic. So fight for the values first. So very subjective takeaway from my side. So what can we do next? First thing, there is a lot of stuff already there. So we don't need to duplicate. We don't need to rework on the surveys. So we don't need to rework on declarations and purpose. But maybe what we could do with Panathlon is to offer some help to connect the dots. And maybe do something together. I mean, your organization, Iris and Gwenda, do already a lot of stuff. You play already a great role. There are things happening on the markets, in the media. So maybe what we could facilitate as Panathlon, and I'm looking at my dear friends there, is to try to connect a little bit the dots and maybe help you to resonate more with your own activities. That's the first thing I would suggest. The second thing I would like to suggest is a sort of conclusion that we would agree together, mainly with the speakers, on a few points we could highlight after today's discussion. We would ask you maybe to come back with your ideas, and we could have a sort of executive summary of our conclusions. And this executive summary of our conclusions should be a joint paper, if you are happy to co-sign it, that we can start selling to the public being obviously the institutions, Marisa, I look at you, obviously, but also the European Parliament, the presidencies, the Council of Europe, but also then the sports institutions, Olympic Committee, both at international and national level. We can go also to economic operators. Some of us have a sports betting background. We can go to these guys and say, do something about that in order to give an economical force and power behind our action. And then maybe a last idea, once we have a common understanding of the outcome of today's discussions, is also to try to connect with the discussions on the future of Europe. You know, that there is a conference discussing the way forward for Europe, and I think we could do something about, obviously, gender equality in sports, taking as an example cycling as it was the issue we wanted to promote today. So a few ideas from my side, and I suggest that we reconnect, we rediscuss this, and try to come to maybe a little paper. I don't have the ambition to call it as a manifesto, but something like this, that is the outcome of this conversation today, and that we can use with stakeholders of society at large. So let me also finish by thanking the organizers, of course, Panathlon International U Brussels, but I want to stress the names of a few guys, Yves van den Abele, Gert Krukke, and Paul Standard, who have been extremely busy. It's amazing that it was really a team of men who decided to go for that, where the members of our little club, that are myself and Beata, were not very proactive, so that's very good. And I would also like to invite you all to become members of our club. Become member of this little club. It's a nice circle. We try to do things. We try to make an impact in the political world, maybe more than in reality. But we would really like more members, more women members, so please join us. We are all volunteers, but we firmly believe in these values and in ethics in sports. So thank you. I was also asked if the speakers can join for a picture. Paul wants us to have a picture all together. I don't know how he plans to organize that. But yeah, I hope you then enjoy the lunch now. Thank you for those who were watching us, and thank you to the technicians for facilitating that. Bye-bye, ciao.